Hi, this is Paul, and I'm back again with Chris. Chris and I did a video not very long ago where we talked about calculus and God, and the video was very well received, and just opened up whole new vistas for me with that video. So, Chris, I'm really pleased that you're willing to come back on and talk some more about some of this and some other stuff. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's fantastic. Well, Paul, it's a pleasure to speak with you again. And man, I've enjoyed your content so much over the last months now, I guess. Yeah. So just an update on the whole calculus thing. After I did the video, I've been trying to write a blog post to explain things a little more clearly. Not done, but hopefully within finding time for it's a bit of a challenge.
Okay.
But hopefully within a month or two, I'll have that done. It's going to be titled "Standing on the Shoulders of Acrobats."
Oh,
Which is a play on Newton's Standing on the Shoulders of Giants.
right.
But anyway, we'll get into that. What happened, though, is out of the video, one of my kids sent it to a friend of his that's a prof at U of T. I think he's in genetics. But he sent a link back about this book that is just released by a Cornell prof of mathematics called Infinite Powers: How Calculus Reveals the Secrets of the Universe. So this is, I don't have the author's name in front of me.
Stephen Strogatz, something like that.
So
you can find it on Amazon.
That's right. So since I'm like just an engineer and not a professor of mathematics, I thought it was, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read a couple quick paragraphs of the introduction.
No, go ahead.
It's almost word for word what I was saying.
Really?
Oh, so it blew. I was like excited and like, oh, well, maybe I can go back to doing my job full time. Anyway, so his introduction is: without calculus, we wouldn't have cell phones, computers, or microwave ovens. We wouldn't have radio or television or ultrasound for expectant mothers, or GPS for lost travelers. We wouldn't have split the atom, unraveled the human genome, or put astronauts on the moon. We might not even have the Declaration of Independence. It's a curiosity of history that the world was changed forever by an arcane branch of mathematics. How could it be that a theory originally about shapes ultimately reshaped civilization? And then he goes on, he says, the essence of the answer lies in a quip that the physicist Richard Feynman made to novelist Herman Wouk. And the quip, I'm going to skip ahead. The quip is, he asked Wouk, does he know calculus? And I guess it's Wouk or Wouk. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. But anyway, and Wouk admitted he didn't. And Feynman said, you had better learn it. It's the language God talks. So that's just the introduction. The book's new. I've only had it a few days. I've skimmed through it.
Wow.
And it's a really fantastic exposition of what calculus does in our world and how it came about. A little less history than the other book.
Yeah.
But it's just beautifully well done by someone that absolutely loves the math. I mean, he's a professor of applied math at Cornell.
Wow.
So that excited me yet again.
Well, I wish I had known this stuff when I was learning calculus in college. You know, I was just learning calculus because they told me I should. So I guess that's why you learn half the stuff you learn when you're young. But fascinating stuff. No, and the conversation that we had, I had never thought about any of that stuff. And I'm, of course, kind of a junkie on new ideas. So I get excited easily.
Me too.
So I'll add this to yet the enormous pile of books that I intend to read, and some of which I've started reading but haven't finished. And
yep,
fascinating, but
absolutely
really cool.
So I don't know how to start talking about the Vervaeke video, the most recent one, where he talks about agape, and Jesus and what that means, except that I was really surprised at how well expressed at least a portion of the gospel was.
Yes. I thought so. I just put a video out this morning, and I didn't comment yet on the latest video that he did, but the one before, where he had the last 10, 12 minutes where he talked about love and the power of love. And I thought, as I said in my video, I thought I'm going to rip a bunch of this stuff off, because this is really, I hadn't heard anybody quite put it the way he did. And so I was very impressed by, by how he laid it out. And so then I watched the next video. You sent me, a lot of people sent me that video, said, you have to watch this video, you have to comment on this video. And when I saw it, I thought, I do have to comment on this video, but there's a whole bunch of things I need to say before we get to that video, because the context is fraught. And you can talk about Buddhism in a way publicly now that no one is threatened by. I mean, you can somewhat talk about Islam. I mean, that's obviously for political reasons a bit fraught, but Christianity is so overwhelmingly fraught in our Western post-Christendom context. So he, of course, has to give all these disclaimers, and then and it's also fraught because, find two theologians have two perspectives on the same book.
Right. It's fraught because all us Christians have been arguing about the nuance and the detail of what he's talking about for 500 years now.
Right. So what struck you about it, and why did it grab your attention the way it did?
Well, many things. First of all, that it was just this straightforward, aside from he made some disclaimers. Okay, so one thing that struck me was his tone while he's talking about this seems substantially different than other videos he's done. There was, at moments, there was a fair bit of gravitas in his, and maybe I'm reading that, I'll have to go back and watch some other video to be certain about that, but it certainly seemed that way to me. And I think he mentioned in some of his early stuff that he was brought up Christian.
Yeah, I remember that too.
So there's something there that was a little bit, it seemed like it was a little bit personal.
Yeah.
But aside from that, it was having, given what you were just saying, it was a straightforward, non-polemical, non-argumentative expression of what part of his take is anyway on agape and the fact that God's love burst on the scene 2,000 years ago, and he used the term, it was incarnated in Christ. And so those things really caught my ear. When he made the distinction between what, I think he was on to Paul already, but maybe not, but the distinction between Plato, through the Enlightenment of Plato, that Plato had done it in a, I'm not using his words, but my memory of his words, intellectual level, and that this was incarnated into an actual life, right? Which is so much the heart of the gospel, right?
Yep.
So I was astounded by that, actually. I'm quite pleased and felt like maybe Peterson has blazed a trail through some of this, of going, of walking into what they think about Christianity and publicly expressing it. Anyway, sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's really interesting, and flesh that out. I had a part of the problem that I have is so yesterday I had a conversation with a guy who, I mean, it's so much fun being me. I really feel a little selfish just because I had a conversation with a guy who kind of mapped out. He gave me his perspective on Peterson and Sam Harris, and also Peterson and the biblical series, about why that was such a breath of fresh air. And when you said this, I kind of got the sense that you were having a similar experience watching Vervaeke talk about the Bible here. And so this individual I have yet to get permission to I think he will share the video. But the point he made was that, again, this fraughtness of the Bible in our culture, when Christians talk about the Bible, it's immediately dismissed because of, they're supernaturalists, let's say. Okay, so it's immediately dismissed. And then Sam Harris talks about the Bible. Everyone now sort of has the idea that, okay, Sam Harris is going to be immediately dismissive of the Bible. And so when either side talks about the Bible, everybody just, it's map territory. We've seen this movie before. We're done with it. And then Peterson sort of steps in with his biblical series, and in kind of a new innocence, just, this is the book, and it's really cool. And he's not part of the Christian tribe, so he's not dismissed for that. And he's not being dismissive like Sam Harris. I'm not saying it anywhere as well as the guy who said it yesterday said it, but when you said what you said just now, that's what I saw. So I don't know if that's true.
I think it's completely true. In fact, I think it reveals that Sam Harris, in the middle of a Christian culture, he's arguing in a Christian way about the Bible, but against it.
Say more about that. What do you mean in a Christian way?
Well, I think in some ways, I don't know who I heard say this like years ago, but that the new atheists were, I think it was Roger Scruton when he was having a discussion with them. It's on YouTube. And Scruton makes the point that, well, you're a whole lot more religious than anyone on this side of the table. Talking to, because the tone of the discussion and the framework is almost like Sam Harris is like a Puritan.
Yes. Yes.
Right? It's the same tone.
Right. And I think, and I know this is going to get fraught quickly with some people who watch my channel very faithfully. Yeah. Sam Harris and a whole group of Christians are kind of mirror opposites of each other.
That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
It's an epistemological foundationalism.
Yep.
And so this whole idea of what truth is. Now, a video just came out with Vervaeke doing a conversation with another guy. It's not on Vervaeke's channel. Google served it up to me. And Vervaeke talks about the different aspects of truth in that video, which I thought was really good. And so that'll make an appearance on one of my videos soon. But I think you're exactly right that the conversation had sort of been like this, and Peterson kind of sidestepped this somehow and walked through the middle and said, oh, here's the Bible. And everyone was kind of like, I haven't seen that book before, even though these two sides have been going like this forever. And Vervaeke's video had some of that quality to it too, a freshness.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think maybe Peterson's made like it okay again, just to be straightforward. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
So part of my history about that is that when I went through seminary, this was a big interest for me. So I did this. I did a project where I took down all the statements of faith from all the Canadian churches that I could find. Didn't take them down, right? No, I read them down.
You recorded them.
Through them and went, okay, so where in these statements of faith is there any direction to love God? No, and I'm making a generalization that isn't fair to all of them.
Right.
And I'm saying this as a Christian that goes to a church that
right
from that church, right? And I've been to many of them and love them. But the statements of faith are all polemical. Almost all. They're definitions of our territory, how we define who we are, separate from others. And they all have good reasons and good. And I'm all for arguing theology and getting it right.
Yep.
And this sort of thing. Well, actually, so I'll tell you a brief story about my point of view. I was in my church history class, and our professor, who's a sweet man, and but he was talking about the Reformation, right? And he was saying how it's really sad how the church split, and but there was really important theological issues at stake, right? Which we all agree with to some degree. So I piped up, because I guess I had a bit of an attitude about it at that moment. I popped up and said, well, isn't unity a theological issue?
Yeah. Didn't Jesus pray for that in John 17?
Yeah. So it's, I'm maybe that was not the nicest thing to do in class. Exactly. But I do believe that.
Yeah.
And I believe there's a lot of harm we've done to people who are outside of the church.
Yeah.
By being so polemical about it.
Yeah.
So basically my capstone paper at the church was trying to bridge all of those, to work on a way without being too postmodern about it, to express the Christian message in a different kind of Christian, in a different kind of service that expresses. I don't want to go into it too far here, but that I'm really interested in that issue. How do we show Christ? And you quoted, what was his name? He was a retired missionary who came back from the field.
Oh, Leslie Newbegin.
Newbegin. The church is the hermeneutic of the gospel.
Right. Yep.
Meaning the church, the active community of the church, right, expresses the gospel to the world around us properly. And so I'm really interested in taking that literally.
Well, it's true.
Yeah.
It's just true, and it's always been true. So when I went to Australia, the the person that invited me out, his name is Warren Mills.
Yeah.
And Warren is I don't know what degree he has. He got started sort of as a mechanic, and then got into the auto industry in Australia and became a consultant and did a whole bunch of things throughout his whole life. And he's retired now. And he was quite successful in a lot of what he did, but he's not an academician. And he did things like build his own race car because he wanted to try and do it. He built his own travel trailer, and he just enjoyed working with his hands and putting things together. He's not an engineer, and so he would build something, and then it would, so it just that kind of guy. And so then when he was retired, he's like, well, what am I going to do with myself? Because he's a guy who's always got to be doing something. He's just that person. So he decided to write. And so the first book he wrote, which hasn't been published, is about, I forget the guy's name, a Southern California, the guy who basically created drag racing in California. And the second book he wrote, which is published, which I'll post the book, a section of the conference was essentially an introduction to his book, which was all about the golden rule. How, basically how good is the golden rule? Right. And I read about 2/3 of the book on the flight to Australia because it's a long flight, but it's a really lovely book because he essentially makes the point that we often, first of all, because of the churches he grew up in, he never heard the golden rule expounded, never heard a sermon about the golden rule. He was at a dispensational church. But then he went to other churches and began hearing it more. But basically, he figured out that the idea behind the golden rule was not just, well, this is what you do to qualify, which is obviously something that the Reformation Protestants have been dealing with for a long time. But it's also sort of to use a Vervaeke term, a psychotechnology, that when you treat someone the way you'd like to be treated, this changes you. And usually the focus is on the other person, but when you practice this, and again, it's the idea of the practice, this changes you. And that of course, is love. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Well, what does love look like? Treat someone the way you'd like to be treated. And what really struck me, and again, it's in the video that I just released today, although who knows when I'll release this video, but the idea of the power of love to transform. And I know some people really took offense when Vervaeke describes, you bring that little baby home from the hospital, and what is that baby? The baby is non-functional. In many ways, the baby is all take from the mother, from the father, from
Right.
It's complete need and demand. Yet you love the baby, and what love does is turn the baby into a person. Now, I'm not going to get into regard of a person and all of those issues of abortion, but
Yeah.
but that's what love does. And there was a pastor in Grand Rapids who, one of his favorite illustrations he would go to was always the Velveteen Rabbit, this little book where the rabbit becomes real by the love of the child. And Toy Story is essentially the same point.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
And so, I too had the same, even though Vervaeke doesn't identify as a Christian, much more identifies more as a Buddhist, I thought his articulation of love and the power of love and agape was really profound. And it's going to be interesting watching and your observation now that Peterson seemed to have opened something up. And Vervaeke, while he often, if you watch his Rebel Wisdom conversation, differentiates himself from Peterson in a number of ways. And in this other video that I watched yesterday, only got halfway through it. It's the story of my life, only getting halfway through stuff, but also differentiates himself from Peterson in a number of ways. But Peterson opened something up, and the Bible seems to be walking through.
Yeah. Well, actually, I thought, okay, so Peterson's talking about logos, and Vervaeke's talking about agape. And the verse that struck my mind, which if you take what each one of them is saying in full seriousness and full strength, the verse of speaking the truth in love takes on a much, much bigger, it's not just about being nice to people while you tell them that what they're doing wrong.
Right. Which is usually what churches do.
Yeah, that's it. So that's the that's the pare down to sort of polite life. But it's almost like they're both coming at the person of Christ in the way they're explaining it from two different directions.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I was just going to ramble on about it, so please.
Well, and it's always struck me there's a funny thing about Peterson in that logos is, I just watched a video by, there's a guy who has a channel all on Jung stuff, and he just made a video of how Peterson and I get things wrong because we're too stuck on logos, which I thought was funny because I don't think I've talked about it that much, but Peterson has. And I've always thought it was kind of funny that when you look at Peterson's opening gambit and maps of meaning, this primary fork where he and Sam Harris diverge between the world as a space of object and a world as a form for action, that agape, and I got to be careful there because New Testament scholarship, I mean, there's all this technical stuff out there. This is part of the reason that it's fraught. And how much is agape? About 30 years ago, someone wrote a book that essentially made pretty hard and fast differentiations between especially phileo and agape. And New Testament isn't always that precise with them. But as a schema, as kind of a mapping, I always thought it was funny that for Peterson, even though he really goes with the world as a form for action, and that's foundational for his map of meaning, that agape doesn't have, isn't more out there than logos.
Mhm.
And so, if maybe that's just because of the cultural fight that Peterson's trying to fight. But
Yeah.
if the world is a forum for action, at the top of the Christian hierarchy is not really truth, it's love. And you don't want to separate truth from love, but the point is love more than truth.
Yeah, I think so, but I run into the same thing. So basically, in the person of Christ, right? So in the incarnate person of Christ, he's both the way and the truth,
Right.
and he is the incarnation of God's love,
Right. And
right?
so way,
And
the
so,
truth, and the life. Way is, of course, action.
yeah,
That's the primary focus on way.
hmm
But it's, no one, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me, which again
yeah,
is one of these just audacious things that Jesus says,
yeah.
which a bunch of skeptical scholars have to get out of Jesus' mouth, because if you leave that in Jesus' mouth, Jesus is this enormous problem that C.S. Lewis faces full on and says,
Yeah.
if you're just going to demythologize Jesus, what's the point?
And Vervaeke quoted this, right? Not to confuse the conversation and jump around too much, but Vervaeke quoted him as describing himself as the way.
That's right. That's right.
I was like, okay.
Well,
Pretty
and
amazing.
what's been fascinating, I just kicked the table. What's been fascinating me about Vervaeke's mission here has been all of the tools that he is, handing out along the way.
Yeah.
And people are like, well, because the first video course was Buddhism and cognitive psychology. So a whole bunch of conservative Christians are going to look at that and say, put the Buddhist label on him and say, no, thank you. And that's a mistake, I think. And it's the same mistake that Christians make seeing Peterson, and they put the Jung label on him or the Darwin label and say, no, thank you. That's a mistake.
Yeah.
And let them do their thing and get, especially as they're dropping tools along the way and energizing a community, don't ignore that.
No, I really love the way you talk about this and talk about it in terms of language, and because I think part of that comes out of, we were talking before about all the confessions that churches have and their loyalty to those and their way of understanding our Christianity. I don't know, we've had kind of a common experience, and you can correct me, but like my experience in going to Cuba and being involved with Cuban Christians, I think kind of informs my opinion about how to listen to Peterson and Vervaeke and really anyone else. Because when we first went down there, with the attitude that we were coming to teach and to help, right? And because, well, if you have money and other people don't have money, there's and I slowly became aware of all the implied arrogances that go along with that, right? Over a few years.
Yeah.
My wife was a little bit faster in the uptake on that. But once we got to know things down there, when we brought some missions groups down to do work, to clear out spaces, to put on children's programs, this sort of thing. But I would tell people to watch what happens when you just listen to how they interact with Christ and with salvation. And watch what happens to your own awareness of what you're carrying in your culture. Now, Cuban Spanish culture is different than Canadian or even Californian, I would expect.
Yeah.
But it's not, they're still like Western.
Yeah.
And so it's not completely different. But in that kind of like overlap, you begin to like shed a little bit of, oh, I was carrying this as part of my idea about Christianity or that. And I'm sorry, I can't put something to mind, draw something to mind. But for me, I got a much clearer picture in my mind about what the core of my salvation is and who Christ is. by seeing it through someone else's eyes and allowing that to trim away some of what I carried in my church cultures and Canadian culture and, that sort of thing. And it's such a delight.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's so true of meeting vibrant Christians from another culture. You do get the two overlays, you begin to gain some insights. It's, yeah. Your comment too about taking all of that, because if you go to websites, you can pull the doctrinal statements from different churches, and actually evangelical pastors tend to, their doctrinal statements, they usually cut and paste from other churches' doctrinal statements, because they, if you're a Christian Reformed church, you might say, oh, it's the Heidelberg Catechism, the Belgian Confession, and the Canons of Dort, and the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, and the Athanasian Creed, and you can put those on your website and no one will read them. So what churches often do is they take like these 15 points that are kind of some basic evangelical points about, we believe in the Bible, we believe the Bible is the Word of God, we believe that Jesus died for our sins. So, okay, and what's really helpful about those is that gives you then sort of a cultural hash, a cultural heuristic of, okay, this is the approach to the gospel. And whereas I don't want to, it's easy listening to me to imagine, to buy a stereotype of the work of the church, that it is all loss and it is all failure, and that is by no means the truth.
No.
Because churches are doing outreach and evangelism every day, and people are joining churches and being baptized and professing faith. That is all happening as we speak. But in terms of the overall trend, everyone has noticed a continual decline in the efficacy of the standard tools that evangelicals have been using. When D. James Kennedy wrote Evangelism Explosion, and people would go door to door with the question, if you were to die tonight, what would you say to Jesus for him to let you into his heaven? That is so framed in that is so dependent upon a frame that many of us now clearly see is no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
And that movement is, recognizing that movement is important if you're a pastor. But then the question is, what is the frame we're currently working with? And what does that frame allow and not allow? And I think what's interesting about Peterson and now with these videos from Vervaeke, we're seeing again, but in contrast, we're beginning to be able to pick out the frame, because the lightning comes on and we get a glimpse of a shadow and we say, and we watch it, and we watch other people. And I think what this means is that, and I have a lot of nervousness about saying this, that we're going to continue to see the church's language continue to evolve. And that frightens people in the church, because churches have very much been dependent upon creating a certain language and the culture coming from that language, and that language being used to preserve the culture. But what happens is the background keeps changing, and so the words don't mean what they used to mean, and they're not heard like they used to be heard. And actually, it's good news for theologians and pastors. The fight is involved in that everyone is trying to work it out, and all of their attempts are competing. And so the whole thing is fraught. And so then it is really amazing when you have people who are in no way expected to be Christian coming out and doing these kinds of things. And then the response to it is renewed interest in Christianity. There's probably talked too long. I don't know if it was helpful at all, but just thinking out loud.
No. Well, me too. Because I think this is the challenge that the church faces, is how to describe how do you describe what your church is doing to someone who's never been in a church? And that was my problem. I wasn't complaining about the fact that we have good theology in our statements of faith.
Right.
But to someone who's outside of the church, who's used to reading corporate, corporate goals, like this is what this company is about, is we are going to do this and that and the other thing. A statement of faith doesn't do that for people, right? And I also think that part of the harm that's come, I don't know how to express this well, but part of the harm that's come from us having this internal Christendom argument about who's in, who's out, and all the various arguments we've had, is the argument kind of takes place in the air, right? I know there's arguments about what we should do on the ground, but a lot of the argument ends up being in the intellectual space, and in, if you like, the spiritual space. What does it mean to be saved, et cetera, et cetera? So that when it comes to what a church should actually be doing, or what I as a Christian should be doing, it's like a second order issue. It, like what I should be doing in this world. And I think part of the strength and part of the attraction of what Peterson's doing, even for Christians, you could see that Liberty University wanted him there because half their students are reading him.
Yeah.
Not half, but enough.
He colonized their student body already, so you better bring him in the door and try and colonize him.
Right? Because he's telling people how to act in the world, or giving some guidelines about how to act in the world based on scriptural principles, largely. Directly. Not second order, right? Not like, well, you know what I mean, right? I think. Like usually a church, if I was on a church board, you're talking about it to decide how you're going to do something or what you're going to do, that often goes, there's often the 3 steps of logic to actually what happens on the ground. And maybe that's not wrong, but it's not very direct.
Well, yeah. It's just all so hard. Well, and I wrestle with this. It's been so funny because as a pastor, I do these. So I now have this new experience having done videos where I do these videos and I do these meetups, and people watch my videos, and then people come to the meetups, and then every now and then someone from the videos and the meetups will kind of wander into church.
Yeah.
And they're, they might not even know why they're there. They're just curious, and they're kind of like, well, most people kind of understand that you can wander into a church and probably nothing bad is going to happen in most churches.
Yeah.
People are going to be polite and well behaved, and you can just sit in a seat and watch and not have to comment, and then sneak out early or shake the hand with the pastor and say, oh, thank you, this was interesting, and then get the heck out of there. But part of what I'm trying to do is, and this is what I've always done. So I'm watching Peterson and I'm watching Vervaeke, and I'm thinking through all of these things. But then I've got my church life over here, and now there is a filter for me that I do understand what we do in church, and there's a tradition there that needs to be respected, and I have a job to do. In that sense, I'm a professional. I am. And
I'm not trying to get you in trouble.
No, that's right. But at the same time, other people notice through my rough drafts, they're like, Peterson is kind of leaking into your pastor stuff. Yeah, that's right. And I want that actually to happen. But the filter for me is really what I'm always working on, because I have to figure out how I just have to process all of this stuff. And that, I think, on a global level is what is happening, or at a much larger level is what is happening with the church and these things, because we do know that, the ideas out there in the world do impact churches in their cultures one way or another, for better or for worse. They always do. And no matter how churches try to preserve whatever it is that they sense is the genuine article, whether that comes in, inerrancy of scripture, or a confessional statement, or even a non-creedal confessional statement like no creed but Christ, the creeds in Christ are always, because of culture, continuing to morph and move and change. And you see that when you go to Cuba, because you know Christ is there, you recognize Christianity and the genuineness of their faith. You will never be a Cuban Christian, and you wouldn't want to be, but the interchange informs you, and when you come back, you don't come back the same.
No, that's right. And you almost meet Christ in a new way.
Yes.
Right? Which is fantastic. So, I mean, I think for people that are exploring Peterson or Vervaeke or some combination of that, I mean, at the end point, and I guess I'm pretty big on God number 2, is meeting Christ is so much more than, and that's what I was trying to kind of get at by, you can go up this kind of logos path, or you can go up the agape path, but Christ is all those things and more. And I don't know how well we do making that the hermeneutic.
Well, okay, love is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
By definition, agape is costly. Yeah. And part of what's difficult about love is there are false loves along the way, and you, in fact, love is always informed by truth. So I've used Daniel, the homeless alcoholic who I suspect is actually dead, because he hasn't shown up, and I suspect when he got out of jail, he probably took his life. But so when for those 6 years, Daniel, I could not get Daniel to live anywhere else, but literally against the door to my office. The question then is, every day when I come into work and I have to rouse him in whatever state he's in just to get into my office to go to work, and Sunday mornings when, of course, I would open the door and he would come in to make himself a little bit of breakfast in the kitchen, praise God, this is a church that could deal with Daniel. And
yeah.
The first week didn't say, Pastor, you call the police and you get rid of him. I mean, there are way too many families in this church that have disabled children and grandchildren that when they saw Daniel, they knew that, there but for the grace of God would go their son or their daughter. Right. So we could not exorcise Daniel and remove him from our space. We had to learn to live with Daniel. But then the question is, how do we love Daniel? And there are a lot of difficult truths with respect to him, with respect to his alcoholism and his drug use and his mental illness. And so love, we usually look for the expedient often. And so the expedient is sometimes the police are expedient because they remove Daniel from the scene. A handout is expedient because it satisfies the immediate desire of the person. There's a facile application of the golden rule. If I were a homeless alcoholic, drug user, and I say, give me $10 so I'll have beer for the day, you'll make me happy by giving me $10. The question is that love? And so, and this is, we as human beings run into the question of, what does love require in these terribly complex, fraught interpersonal relationships? Every parent deals with that. Every school teacher, every pastor, anyone who deals with people has to deal with that question. And it's often the case that the answer is not obvious. And usually the most correct answer is costly. And
yeah. Well, I was a foster parent for many years. So I know what you're talking about. That you sometimes you just don't know what the right answer is. And actually, I thought of that when Vervaeke was talking about, you take a little child and you love them, and that's how you make a person. I'm like, yeah, love is not hard on a blank slate, as he was describing it, right? It's not, it's not easy for parenting is not easy, period, right? But it's workable it's workable and doable for just good people, right? But to take someone like the homeless person, Daniel, or to, in some cases, some foster children that we had, or anyone that has been harmed in this world substantially, for them to go through to experience the transformation that Vervaeke was talking about, to experience that takes something more. And I'm not trying to give myself credit here, and I'm not. It takes something more from somewhere else. It takes something transcendent to happen. It also takes you being there, in my opinion, with hands and feet, and providing at least safety. But to undo that damage, that's the point of the gospel, right? If there was no fall, then all we would need was Vervaeke's a description of agape. That's how it was running through my head when he was talking. But when people are broken, they don't receive love very well. There's all kinds of barriers up, and that was our experience in fostering, and sometimes it turned out beautifully, and God made a difference at some point, and then all of a sudden everything worked. And sometimes it didn't happen. Yeah. At both things.
Well, that is, I really like how you phrased it, because in some ways that is the definition of perdition, of lostness, is an inability to receive love, an inability to recognize love. And, especially as, say, a foster parent, you're right, you bring that baby home from the hospital, especially if it's we even know now with respect to adoption that even if it's a 2 or 3 week old baby that has been separated from her mother, that there is already a wound that, and which is something that just blows us away, because we do think of that baby as a blank slate, and we don't understand the deep ways that we're connected with each other.
Yeah.
And so as a foster parent, you bring a child with some trouble into your home, and you and your wife are doing everything you can in all sincerity to love the child with the wisdom and truth that you have, and you get resistance, and you understand resistance, because it's enormously complex.
Yeah.
And I think one of the ways to understand the gospel, you can bring that all the way back into Genesis 3, where all that the little sentence that Satan gives the man and the woman, the one question he gives them is the seed of cynical doubt in the goodness of God. The serpent basically suggests that God is being, the irony is that it's an appeal to justice by being cynical about God's justice, calling it injustice, and that sets the path of the world in the story.
Wow.
And so here, in a sense, you see Adam and Eve could not accept God's love. And in terms of the Christian gospel, those who, reject the gospel, in a sense, refuse God's love. And again, the irony, if you're a foster parent, is you play through that script again and again and again. And now, of course, you and your wife are not infallible, and your flaws. But you again and again and again, you try to work with the child and say, this is love. It might not look like love to you right now, but try and accept it if you can. No, oh.
Yeah. And when it's on a knife edge like that, and you've made mistakes, just going back to your not infallible point, because now I feel guilty about joking around about it. But, and when you've made mistakes, it feels like someone's on the knife edge of trust or not trust. And that's really tough.
Yeah.
That's really tough. I know I'm oversimplifying, but there's something about you were expressing the book that the gentleman had written from Australia about about living out the golden rule. And then you talked about how complicated it is. And I resonated with that completely. I think everyone that tries knows this. I think maybe the apostles' disciples, knew this in the upper room after Jesus was gone, and had taught them that they have to love. I don't think they were confused about this, but to me, and maybe it's my Pentecostalism coming out, but to me, it is the Holy Spirit that is supposed to help us navigate the complexity of the sort of the love verse, if you will. That's a terrible phrase, but to navigate the complexity of people and
Yes.
the damage and all those things. I think that's actually not the entire point, but that's a huge part of what the point is of the Holy Spirit. I know it's basic theology, but just in the context of our conversation, I think it's important.
Well, and you're probably, in terms of videos that I think I'll probably be doing, you never know, because circumstances come up and I get distracted and I go somewhere else. But I've spent a lot of time, because I've been in the book of 1 John in my adult Sunday school class, and that's kind of the seed bed of a lot of stuff that I do. And it's not on my normal channel, it's on my church channel. Mm-hmm. But, I've been doing a lot of thinking about what we mean by spirit and what the Holy Spirit, if there's other words we can use to describe the Holy Spirit and the action that it does. And this is where a lot of the Peterson, Vervaeke stuff, a lot of the tools that they've dropped along the way have been helpful in terms of finding new language. Because, it's so interesting in John 13, where Jesus is about to show them his love. And so he strips down, wraps a towel around himself, and washes their feet. Mm-hmm. And that is, in a sense, that we're going to avoid the Catholic Protestant fight over sacraments, but that is, in a sense, a sacrament, what he does right there, in that he now, in a physical, tangible way, embodies and incarnates love in that culture, in that moment, in that context. And of course, it's noteworthy that Peter, speaking for the group, likely, Peter, in many times in the gospel, he's the oldest disciple, is therefore the preeminent disciple. He will speak for the group. So often when Peter speaks, all of the disciples, speaking for all of them, I will not let you love me in this way. it is beneath you, and I will not allow you to humiliate yourself like this. So he's, so they were dealing with status. And I could imagine Jesus in the back of his mind is thinking, you have no idea how far I will go to allow myself to be humiliated for you.
Right.
And suddenly there is love.
Mm-hmm.
And, and it is, and that is the agape that Vervaeke is speaking about, that it is not the abstract concept. It is not only the word. It is when agape gets incarnate. I use often the illustration of a friend of mine who he asked me to do his mother's funeral, and he's a black man, grew up in Watts in LA. Probably most of the kids in his neighborhood are dead or in jail by now. And his mama, kept him in church, made sure he did his schoolwork, and, scrubbed floors, did whatever demeaning job she could so her boy would have a chance. And so I'll tell you, when he's a very successful man, but he loved his mama, and he made sure she always had enough and was always taken care of. And then when she died, she had absolutely the best funeral he could have. And he had political connections. So, there were dignitaries and all kinds of, he pulled in all his favors and said, you're going to be at my mama's funeral, and it's going to be a celebration because of what she did for me. And that is all about love. And the truth is, it's all around us. We see it in every mother, every good mother that sacrifices for her child. Every mother has the child at the risk of her life, sometimes at the cost of her life. And so this is built in, and it's, the world recognized love differently after Jesus. And, and that changed the world. And Vervaeke, I think, I loved when he noted, because it conquered the Roman Empire. Love conquered the empire. And it sounds like Vervaeke says, it sounds trite to us, but it's never trite when we see it incarnated, when we see it manifest in front of us.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, I like what you talked about, it being about the sacramental nature of that. Yeah.
And I think, obviously the Christian sacraments, of the Eucharist, of the Lord's Supper. I don't know. Did you see, I posted on Twitter this, Peter Kreeft was on Eric Metaxas' show. And there's, and Kreeft gets, I love Peter Kreeft, even though he broke the heart of all the Calvin College philosophers when he converted to Catholicism. But
you might notice that he loves Chesterton.
Oh, he does love Chesterton. Yeah. But, it's this, the Lord's Supper is love, it's love expressed in bread and wine.
Actually, I had suspected what he talked about as the reason for the Catholic understanding and the way they framed it, based on the Aristotelian forms. I had thought that for quite a long time, and maybe I'd read it somewhere and forgot where I read it, and it was just a thought hanging around. But I was delighted to hear him go through that, and because it's not like literally, it's something. It's literal, but it's a different literal.
Well, that's exactly the problem with the word literal.
I know.
Everyone uses that word, and it's like, what do you really mean by that word? Because I don't think it means what you think it means.
No.
And I mean, it gets into, and I think, Jonathan Peugeot, one of the real gifts that I think he gives us is Jonathan has a way of framing some of this stuff in a very powerful way that, when Jesus says, "This is my body," well, you don't have to be Bill Clinton to ask the question, what do you mean by is? That is perhaps the question of Western civilization, of this whole thing. What is the definition of is? What is being?
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And this is, well, actually, I don't know why I started thinking, but Zizek, so I think he was lying. I don't think his favorite theologist
Theologist.
Chesterton or Kierkegaard, theologist, whatever. I think his first favorite theologist is Hegel.
Yeah. Hegel, oh gosh. Philosophy. I mean, Hegel essentially, I mean, there's and Vervaeke gets into this in his first lecture when he talks about Hebrew narrative. Once you have an autobiographical narrative, you're going to have stories progress. When stories don't progress, they're not stories. And so you're going to have a progressivism built into the West, period. But then the question is always, what exactly is the story about? Because that's the narrative line in which there will be progress. And then also, what is the telos? What is the end of the story? What is the story pointing to? That really matters. And so that's where, in a sense, truth and love, they're right in there, because the story is about love and the story points to love. The story is also about truth and the story points to truth.
Yep.
Oh, Zizek, now since watching that thing, I've seen a few other videos of his and tempted to read a book or two, but part of me listens to him and thinks he is the definition, he is the embodiment of, I'm not sure, he may be the embodiment of when Vervaeke talks about Frankfurter's bullshit. All he's doing sometimes when he's talking is bullshitting, in that it's
hard to tell.
Yes, it's hard to tell. And so my question for him is it just pure bullshit in the philosophical sense? Or because if, in a sense, if there is no string that holds the pearls together and gives the pearls cohesion, that's the difference between bullshitting and actually, doing something. C.S. Lewis in the Screwtape Letters has the devils basically say, the way you capture a human soul is to add the bullshitting line, is basically to bullshit someone for their whole entire life. And you make their life literally pointless. There's no point to their life. You just keep them busy with amusements. And that's a terribly dangerous thing for our age, that now via the internet has no end of amusements that we can fill ourselves with.
Absolutely. So that's why I thought about Hegel as a religious figure.
Well, he's a very religious figure.
Absolutely. Because it's basically a replacement religion, right?
Yes.
Encapsulating Christianity,
right,
and telling a new meta-narrative, at least as far as I understand it. And so, I listened to Zizek talk about two of my favorite writers and mess around with what they were saying for Peterson's benefit, or to be funny, or to probe Peterson. I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Because there's a sense in which Peterson's approach to faith is pretty similar to, it's kind of Kierkegaardian, right? In Fear and Trembling, it's very hard to have faith. You're just stepping up to the edge, right? And I've wondered if Peterson's read a lot of Kierkegaard. And then Peterson's also said some things that I thought were right out of Chesterton before, but he didn't seem like he'd read, when Zizek brought it up, didn't seem like he'd read orthodoxy or anything.
No, I don't think if Peterson has read Chesterton, I don't think he's integrated him. I again, my read on Peterson, well, I've said a lot about my read on Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a modernist, and in a sense, his Christianity is very deeply tied to 1960s 1960s mainline, the type of thing that you'd find in, let's say, some readings of neo-orthodoxy. But there's Jung and there's Piaget. Piaget is a big influence on Peterson, more than because Peterson basically gets his eschatology from Piaget.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, whenever Peterson trots out his equilibrated state, that's Peterson's kingdom of God, city on the hill. That's it for Peterson.
Yep.
And so then what Peterson is constantly striving to do then is to embody that in his life.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason he asked for the prayer request at Liberty that he did was it's in a sense all on him and all on us, and that is the heart, I think, of the modernist position.
Yep.
And that is taking one very definite take from this question of agency that we haven't been able to penetrate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, I thought that Zizek was picking some writers out who he thought were maybe influential to Peterson. And I think he was also trying to do like a circle around, like just a demonstration of his philosophical breadth and depth.
Yeah.
And since it was Good Friday, which I thought was the oddest thing. Okay, so it's Good Friday, and they're talking about the crucifixion. The Zizek is anyway.
Yes.
And I don't know. I thought, you know what? I immediately thought of there's this sermon. I forget who was referring to it. Someone that my wife and I met. Tony Campolo, referring to being in a sermon competition at his home church.
Yep.
And the guy preaching ahead of him was preaching, "It's Friday, but Sunday's coming."
Right. Yep.
Right. So I don't know. That was running through my head immediately after watching the Peterson Zizek thing. I'm going, how do we get these guys to Sunday? Because Friday's not good enough.
Well, there's a whole lot of folks that are working on Peterson.
Yeah,
trying to colonize him.
Carrying your cross up a hill doesn't always end well.
No, they put the cross up and they put you on it. That's what's at the top of the hill.
It's good to have a plan for a couple days later. I'm sorry, I'm being.
No, you're.
I'm channeling my inner Zizek there.
Yeah.
But no, I'm interested. I hope that Peterson reads Orthodoxy because there's a lot in there.
Yeah. Well, Chesterton, so Peter Kreeft talked about Chesterton as philosopher in his talk with Eric Metaxas, which I thought was very interesting. Yeah, Peterson, I think, just like all of us, the events of his life that he cannot control will have more say in the final definitive story of his life than even many of our aspirations.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I just have so much respect for his approach because it's such a grounded approach.
Yeah.
and it's making, I mean, it's marvelous. But the reason I mentioned Chesterton, I'm sorry, I know I'm a bit stuck on Chesterton, is because, we were talking earlier about the groundedness of Peterson and Vervaeke in various sciences. So orthodoxy, in my reading, in Chesterton's writing, there's not a lot of separation between how you act in the world and the philosophical theory. In fact, within a paragraph, it's back and forth and back and forth. So there's a real vertical integration, to steal a word out of industry.
Yeah.
In Chesterton's thought, because he's not a formally trained theologian or philosopher.
Right.
It really was. His experience is a ground up experience. And it's not reductionist. It's really, really solid in so many ways and refreshing. So that's why I'm a huge fan of his. Not that I think everything he says is right. And he's a little bit hard on some Christian groups.
He's just so much fun,
And there's that too. But anyway.
Well, we've gone for over an hour now, so we should. I had a guy signed up for 11 o'clock and he canceled. So.
Okay. Well, I don't have much more to say, and I should probably get back to work.
Yep, I should probably work on my sermon, but thank you, Chris, and yeah. I have to. So before I do a video on something like that next, I've only watched the episode 16 of Vervaeke's thing. I've only watched it once. I'll usually watch it 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times before I do a video on it, because when I watch it, it's, it sinks in deeper and deeper, and I hear things I didn't hear the first time, and just my picture of it gets clearer. But so Peterson sort of opened this door, and, Vervaeke is however he feels about it is part of the mix. And yeah, where's all this stuff going? I don't know, but it sure is an interesting ride.
It's pretty exciting.
It is. It's very exciting.
Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you, Chris. You take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.